Imagine the most important meeting of your life. The stakes couldn't be higher. Then the doors burst open, and a stranger walks in claiming to be your secret daughter. What would you do? This CEO's world just shattered live on camera, and the fallout is unbelievable. Don't miss out on the next twist. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon to stay updated with all our latest stories. Thanks for being a part of this adventure. The towering glass edifice of Sterling Innovations stood as a testament to the company's meteoric rise in the tech world. The building, sleek and modern, gleamed under the late afternoon sun, its reflective surface shimmering with the promise of future conquests. Inside, the hum of productivity buzzed through the air like the buzz of a high-powered machine. From the design team working late into the evening on new product iterations, to the analysts poring over quarterly reports, every corner of the building exuded the kind of ambition that turned dreams into reality. At the very top of this empire, sitting in a corner office that commanded the city skyline, was Arthur Vance. Known for his ruthless precision in business and his impeccable public persona, Arthur was the unchallenged CEO of Sterling Innovations, a tech titan that had become one of the most powerful forces in the global market. He had built this empire from the ground up, starting with a handful of employees in a small Silicon Valley office and growing it into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. To the outside world, Arthur Vance was a figurehead of success. He was tall, commanding, always dressed in perfectly tailored suits that spoke of wealth and status. He had mastered the art of making business decisions with surgical precision, effortlessly balancing risk and reward. He exuded control over his company, control over the media, and most of all, control over how he was perceived. His image was that of a calculating mastermind, a leader who never let emotions cloud his judgment, a man who never backed down. His words carried weight, and his presence was intimidating. No one dared to question Arthur, at least not without facing the consequences. Yet, as he sat behind his imposing desk, his fingers steepled together, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Today he felt the faintest flicker of unease in the pit of his stomach, a discomfort he hadn't experienced in years. It was a gnawing sensation, subtle but undeniable. He forced it aside, pushing back the feeling that was inching toward the edges of his composure. Tomorrow's board meeting. It was a pivotal moment. The fate of Sterling Innovations rested on a crucial decision: the acquisition of Kerrigan Tech, a smaller but highly innovative tech company, was on the table. This deal would solidify Sterling's place as the undisputed leader in its field, expanding its reach into untapped markets and cementing its dominance in the tech world. Arthur had carefully orchestrated every aspect of this deal, ensuring that every contingency was accounted for, every obstacle removed. The acquisition was supposed to be a mere formality, nothing more than a rubber stamp on his vision, but there was a weight to it. The stakes felt higher than ever before, and Arthur couldn't ignore the growing tension in the air. The board, his trusted inner circle, the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, were not as certain about this deal as they had once been. There had been murmurs, subtle disagreements among the board members. Some were concerned about the price of the acquisition, others about the potential fallout if it didn't go as planned. But Arthur, ever the strategist, had prepared for this. He had made his case, crushed any dissenting opinions, and convinced them that this was a step that could not be avoided. The deal would go through. He would make sure of it. Yet the feeling of unease lingered. Arthur Vance was a man who thrived on certainty. He didn't leave things to chance. Everything in his world was calculated, controlled, executed with precision. But as the evening stretched on, as he sat in his office with the blinds drawn, he couldn't shake the thought that something was coming, something that could shatter the perfect image he had so carefully built. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an incoming message from his assistant, Rebecca. The board members are already gathering in the conference room. Should I hold off on any of the final details until after the meeting tomorrow? Arthur glanced at the message, his fingers gripping the phone tighter. Rebecca had always been efficient, too efficient at times. She knew better than to ask such questions. But it was a small reminder of the uncertainty creeping into his life. The phone buzzed again, this time with an update on the financials of the Kerrigan Tech deal. A final batch of documents confirming the terms. He glanced at them briefly but didn't feel the rush of satisfaction he usually did when finalizing such a monumental transaction. His mind kept drifting back to the board, the people he had surrounded himself with over the years, people who had never questioned his authority. But now there was a sense that even they were starting to notice the cracks in the armor. The deal had become bigger than just business. It was about Arthur Vance's legacy, his control, and his unshakable authority. His vision had driven Sterling Innovations to the heights it had reached. But this acquisition, this single deal, could either solidify his place in history or signal the beginning of his downfall. The meeting tomorrow would decide it all. The acquisition was vital, but Arthur knew it was more than that. It was his dominance that was at stake. He had built this company into a machine, one that ran smoothly because he pulled all the strings. The moment that control slipped, even just a little, it could all come crumbling down. For a man who had always thrived on control, the thought of losing it was unbearable. But even as Arthur attempted to calm his nerves, there was a sinking feeling in his gut that told him this storm wasn't just inevitable. It was coming faster than he could prepare for. Tomorrow's board meeting would either mark the beginning of a new chapter for Sterling Innovations or the start of something much darker. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the city lights in the distance. The empire he had built was not invincible, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever storm lay ahead. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as the members of Sterling Innovations' elite board gathered around the polished, long conference table. Arthur Vance sat at the head, his presence commanding the room as always. The documents detailing the Kerrigan Tech acquisition were spread out before him, his fingers lightly tapping on the corner of a contract as he reviewed the final figures. This was the moment that could change everything, a deal so massive it would seal his legacy. The board members, dressed in their finest corporate attire, murmured quietly among themselves. They had all been briefed. They all knew what was at stake. It was clear in their eyes, the quiet anticipation of a decision that would make or break their careers. Some of them were uneasy, but no one dared to voice their doubts aloud. This was Arthur's show, and they were merely the supporting cast. He had always been the one to steer the ship, and they had learned to trust his instincts until now. But something in the air was different. The usual hum of confident voices was subdued. A flicker of discomfort seemed to dance in the shadows, unseen but felt by every person in the room. Even Arthur, whose impeccable control was his trademark, couldn't shake the feeling of being on the edge of something. But he had no time for distractions. This meeting was critical. Suddenly the sound of the door opening broke the tension, cutting through the silence like a knife. All eyes turned as a young woman walked into the room, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She was dressed casually in contrast to the formal attire of everyone else, an oddity that would have raised eyebrows even on a normal day. But today it felt like an intrusion. She held her head high, her expression confident and unwavering as she stepped forward into the room. A quiet murmur rippled through the board members, some of them exchanging confused glances. "Excuse me, who are you?" Arthur's voice cut through the room, his normally calm demeanor tinged with irritation. He stared at the young woman, his gaze hardening. "I'm Lily," she said, her voice steady but full of undeniable conviction. "And I need to speak to everyone." Arthur's face faltered for just a moment, his brow furrowing. This wasn't supposed to be happening. His hand instinctively moved toward the security alarm under the table, but his fingers hesitated just before they made contact. There was something about the way she carried herself, something that felt unsettlingly familiar. "Lily, Arthur began, rising from his seat, but the words faltered in his throat. "I'm here because I have something important to say," Lily interrupted, her eyes locking with Arthur's. "Something that concerns you and your company, Sterling Innovations." A tense silence settled over the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to react. Arthur's usual composure was slipping, and the sight of him suddenly off balance made the air feel thick with unease. "What is this? What is this about?" Arthur demanded, his voice now edged with an authority that barely masked the tension crawling beneath the surface. Lily smiled, just slightly. There was something almost tragic in that smile, like she knew something that no one else did. "You don't recognize me, do you, Arthur Vance?" A few board members exchanged looks, but no one dared speak. Arthur's face turned ashen. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, his mind scrambling for an explanation. Anything to make this situation disappear. His fingers, which had been tapping on the contract earlier with such controlled precision, now dug into the edges of the table, his knuckles whitening with the effort to keep his calm. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, I don't know you." Lily stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You should. Because I'm your daughter. Your secret daughter." A chill ran through the room as the board members, frozen in shock, turned their eyes to Arthur, his carefully constructed world, his public persona, and the unshakable control he had held for so long began to unravel in front of them. The words that Lily had spoken hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating any semblance of calm. Arthur's face contorted, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned to one of the board members, Gary Thompson, his longtime right-hand man and a person who had stood by Arthur through thick and thin. "Get her out of here," Arthur barked, his voice trembling just slightly. Gary didn't move. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and even he could feel it. "Arthur, this is... Gary stuttered, unsure of how to proceed. His confidence, once unshakable, seemed to crumble under the weight of the revelation. Lily's voice cut through the confusion. "I'm not going anywhere, Arthur. I have proof." Her hand moved to the folder clutched in her arm. She opened it slowly, revealing old photographs that were clearly personal, intimate. The images of a young girl, a toddler, alongside a man who could only be Arthur. And there were other documents, some official-looking, with names, dates, and legal references. DNA test results. The proof was irrefutable. Arthur's world, his private world, the one he had kept hidden, was being laid bare before him. Before the board and before the world. Arthur's mind raced, but his thoughts were clouded by a storm of panic and denial. His secret daughter. How, when, why now? The boardroom was silent, the once thrumming energy replaced by an oppressive stillness. The board members, who had been so sure of Arthur's invincibility, were now unsure of what to do. The stakes of this meeting, once about corporate power, had shifted into something far more personal. The balance of power had tilted. This was no longer just about the acquisition. This was about a father's secret, and the daughter who had come to expose it. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. The acquisition, the board, his empire, all of it seemed so insignificant now. What was the price of his carefully constructed control if it all came crashing down in front of him? In front of everyone. The storm had arrived. The shockwave from Lily's revelation hit the boardroom like a tidal wave, drowning the air with chaos. The once sterile corporate space, where power moves were made with precision, was now rife with confusion and uneasy murmurs. Board members exchanged hushed words, their faces a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. A few were too stunned to even speak, while others sat motionless, processing the enormity of what had just unfolded. Arthur's mind raced, his vision narrowing as he fought to regain control. Lily, his secret daughter, stood at the center of the storm, her words still echoing in the room. His empire, once impenetrable, was beginning to crack under the weight of this unrelenting truth. "What do you mean, your daughter?" whispered Tom Harrell, one of the senior board members, a man whose loyalty to Arthur had been unwavering for years. He was the first to break the silence, but his voice was strained, laced with the disbelief that hung heavy in the air. "Arthur, how could you have kept this hidden?" Arthur's gaze flickered toward Tom, the sharp edges of his usually calm demeanor now frayed. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, he closed his eyes, silently willing the situation to dissolve into nothingness, to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, but the reality was unyielding. The door to the conference room opened suddenly, and a junior staff member entered, holding a smartphone in hand. "Arthur, the media's outside. They've caught wind of the situation. There's already a small crowd gathering." The mention of the press was like a bucket of cold water thrown over Arthur's mind. He had carefully curated his image for years, shaped it into something that seemed untouchable. But now, like a house of cards, it was all collapsing, one card at a time. The board, who had been so loyal, now regarded him with suspicion. They had seen his ruthless tactics in the boardroom, but this was different, this was personal. This was family. As whispers grew louder, Lily's presence seemed to weigh heavier, each word she spoke stoking the fire. "Arthur," she said, her voice cutting through the confusion, "don't try to hide from this. You owe me, and you owe your company, an explanation." Arthur's face contorted in frustration. "You don't understand. This has nothing to do with you," he snapped. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. The anger was only a shield to hide his fear, but Lily, unfazed by his outburst, stood her ground. "This has everything to do with me," she said, her eyes narrowing with purpose. "You think I just came here to ruin your little meeting? To expose some family secret? You're wrong, Arthur. I'm here because you've been lying to everyone, and that includes your investors, your board, and your own flesh and blood." The accusation hit harder than anything else she could have said. It wasn't just about their past or the betrayal of a father who had abandoned her. It was about the truth she had uncovered, a truth she was ready to wield against him. The room fell silent once again, save for the low hum of Arthur's breath as he tried to collect himself. His control, the one thing that had always been his strength, was slipping. He could feel it. The eyes of his board members, the unspoken doubt now spreading like wildfire. His position was in jeopardy. Lily's motive was no longer a mystery. It wasn't just a personal vendetta or an emotional reckoning with a father who had forsaken her. No, it was much deeper. She wasn't here merely for a reunion. She was here for a piece of the empire. And from the look in her eyes, Arthur realized that the acquisition of Kerrigan Tech wasn't the only thing at stake anymore. His entire legacy hung in the balance, and Lily was holding the strings. Her hand moved to the folder she had opened earlier, but this time she didn't need to present evidence. Her words were enough. "I have a claim, Arthur," she continued, her voice growing colder, more resolute. "I'm not just your daughter. I'm entitled to something, whether it's your money, your power, or your company. I've waited long enough to make my claim. And now I'm taking it." Arthur felt his stomach twist. The walls were closing in, and he could no longer deny it. Lily had come to not just confront him, but to take what she believed was rightfully hers. The quiet, calculating CEO who had spent his life building an empire was now facing an onslaught he couldn't control. This wasn't a corporate takeover. This was personal. The once unyielding Arthur Vance, the man who controlled billions, who commanded entire industries, was now fighting a battle on two fronts: his fractured relationship with his daughter and the unraveling of his company's most crucial deal. He had thought that his sharp business acumen, his cold, calculated decision-making would keep him in control. But Lily was pushing him into a corner, and he didn't know if he could escape. The tension in the room became unbearable. The whispers among the board grew louder, mixed with nervous glances and shifting eyes. The acquisition of Kerrigan Tech, which had once seemed like a surefire success, now seemed insignificant in the face of this familial drama. Arthur could feel the trust of his board members slipping through his fingers like sand. "What does she want, Arthur?" Tom Harrell asked, his voice cracking with frustration. "What does she want from us?" "From you?" Arthur turned to face the board, his eyes wild, desperate for a solution. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice faltering for the first time in years. "But I'll fix this. I'll get control of this situation." But even as he said the words, he knew he couldn't fix this alone. Lily had already exposed the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The walls he had built to protect himself, his empire, and his reputation were crumbling. As Lily stood there, her presence commanding the room, Arthur felt the full weight of his past mistakes crashing down on him. The media was already outside, the public's curiosity growing by the minute. Sterling Innovations was teetering on the edge of collapse, not just from the acquisition's failure, but from the loss of trust that came with the exposure of his secrets. Arthur's desperation was palpable. He was used to being the one with the answers, the one who controlled the narrative. But now, with his reputation on the line, he found himself trapped in a web of his own making. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was personal. The room was still as an eerie silence settled over the board, but this time it wasn't just the revelation of Lily's identity that had caused the paralysis. It was the weight of the past, a past that Arthur Vance had buried so deep, so far from the prying eyes of the public, that he had almost convinced himself it was nothing more than a forgotten chapter of his life. But now, like a dark spectre, it had emerged, thrust into the spotlight by the very daughter he had tried to erase from existence. Lily stood there, her posture unwavering, her eyes locked on Arthur's as she moved forward with the final evidence, the undeniable proof that was about to unravel everything he had worked for. She opened the folder once again, this time revealing the photographs. They were yellowed with age, the corners slightly curled. Each photo was a relic from a time long gone, before the empire, before the ruthless CEO who had conquered Silicon Valley, before the polished facade that had been so carefully built. The photos depicted Arthur in his younger years, unrecognizable to the corporate mogul he had become. In one, he was standing in a sunlit garden, a young woman by his side laughing as the sunlight caught her hair. Another photo captured a rare moment of tenderness between the two. Their hands clasped together as they walked down a quiet street, their faces flushed with the joy of love. But in the background of these photographs, there was a darkness, something unsaid, an unspoken truth that Arthur had tried so hard to hide. Lily's mother was there, her presence a quiet force in the photos, always in the background, always the one who had remained in the shadows. "Do you recognize these, Arthur?" Lily's voice was cold, yet it carried a weight that Arthur couldn't ignore. "These are the memories you tried so hard to forget. The woman in these photos, that was my mother, Angela. And I am the result of your secret." Arthur's heart clenched. Angela. The name echoed in his mind like a distant, painful memory, one he had buried deep within the vaults of his mind, hoping it would never resurface. Angela had been a part of his life before Sterling Innovations had consumed him entirely. She had been an equal, a partner in the early days of his rise to power. There had been passion, ambition, an intoxicating mix that had fueled their relationship, but it had never been meant to last. Arthur had always known that his future lay in building his empire, and Angela, though smart and capable, had never fit into his vision. Their relationship had been an unfortunate casualty of his pursuit of success, and eventually they had drifted apart. Arthur's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Lily's voice again, sharp and cutting through the haze of his memories. "I know this must be hard for you, Arthur," she said, almost mockingly, "but I came here for more than just closure. I came here to claim what's mine. And it's not just about the money or the inheritance." Lily reached into the folder and produced a DNA test result, a piece of paper that had been the final confirmation of what she had always known deep down. The test was dated just weeks before she had come to the boardroom. There was no ambiguity. The father-daughter relationship had been confirmed, solidified by scientific proof. Arthur's stoic expression faltered as he stared at the results. His mind raced, trying to piece together how it had all come to this moment. His life, everything he had built, was being undone by a truth he had worked so hard to suppress. And yet there it was, written in black and white. Lily was his daughter, and everything that had been left unsaid for years was now impossible to ignore. Arthur's breath hitched as the weight of the moment settled in. Lily's presence was no longer a disruption. It was a reckoning with the choices he had made, with the cost of his ambition, and with the way he had discarded the one woman who had once meant something to him. As Lily's evidence mounted, Arthur's facade began to crack. His mind swirled with memories, of moments he had locked away, of promises he had broken, and of a woman he had loved, but never fully allowed himself to love. He had been so consumed by his quest for power, for control, that he had never stopped to think about the consequences of his actions. The truth about Lily's birth had always been hidden, buried beneath layers of carefully crafted lies. He had convinced himself that severing ties with her mother, walking away from that life, was the only way forward. The cost of building Sterling Innovations was high, but it was a cost he was willing to pay. He had chosen success over everything, over family, over love, and now as he stared at the woman who stood before him, he realized just how much he had sacrificed. But it wasn't just about his regrets anymore. It was about Lily's truth, a truth she had lived with her entire life. Her identity, shaped by his absence, was now finally in full view, and Arthur was forced to confront the reality of what he had done. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had erased her from his life, as if she were nothing more than a fleeting mistake. Lily's eyes never wavered from his. She had seen the cracks in his armor. She had seen the pain in his eyes, and now she was going to use it against him. "I'm not just some secret you can bury anymore," Lily continued, her voice now tinged with a mix of sadness and anger. "I'm here, Arthur. I've always been here, and I deserve a place in your world. Whether you like it or not, Sterling Innovations is a part of me now." The board members, who had been silent throughout the exchange, looked between Arthur and Lily, the realization of the stakes settling in. This wasn't just a corporate battle. This was about legacy, about the cost of choices made in the name of success. Arthur stood frozen, unable to summon the words to respond. The high tension in the room felt suffocating. His world, his carefully constructed empire, seemed to hang in the balance. Could he regain control? Could he ever repair the relationship he had neglected for so long? Or had the damage been done beyond repair? The truth, both painful and undeniable, had been laid bare. And now, as the weight of it all pressed down on him, Arthur Vance was faced with a crisis that went far beyond the boardroom. It was about his legacy, the very foundation on which his empire had been built. And it was crumbling. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift, brutal, and unrelenting. The news of Arthur Vance's long-buried secret, the revelation of his secret daughter Lily, had made its way into the public eye faster than Arthur could ever have anticipated. The media, always hungry for scandal, was now feasting on every detail, every allegation. Headlines blazed across screens. Arthur Vance's family secret exposed. China Sterling Innovations in crisis. CEO's hidden daughter rocks the foundation. And boardroom betrayal. Is Arthur Vance's legacy at risk? Within hours, the fallout spread like wildfire through Sterling Innovations. The board, once loyal and unquestioning, now found themselves in turmoil. Investors who had poured millions into the company began to pull back, fearful of the instability that had been unleashed. The acquisition of Kerrigan Tech, which had once seemed like a guaranteed success, was now in jeopardy. The board members, uncertain about Arthur's leadership, were now divided, some calling for his resignation, others calling for an emergency meeting to reassess the direction of the company. The company's stock prices, once soaring high, plummeted. In just a few hours, Sterling Innovations had lost millions in market value. The investors who had trusted Arthur, who had seen him as an infallible business genius, were now questioning his judgment, his ability to lead. Rumors spread that Arthur was too distracted by his personal issues to focus on the company's future. The once ironclad reputation he had meticulously crafted began to unravel piece by piece. In the wake of the chaos, Arthur found himself at the center of a storm he had never seen coming. His career, his entire legacy, was hanging by a thread. The man who had once controlled everything with an iron fist was now faced with the painful reality of his past. His relationship with Lily had turned his carefully built world upside down, but it wasn't just the corporate chaos that weighed on him. It was the personal cost of the choices he had made. Lily, standing in the center of it all, became an enigma, one that Arthur couldn't quite decipher. She had exposed him for who he really was, not just to the board, but to the world. He had always been the one who held the power, who called the shots. But now, as he watched his empire crumble, he realized that Lily had the leverage he never thought anyone could have over him. But what did she want? That was the question that gnawed at him, the question that for once he couldn't answer. Lily's next steps seemed unclear, though the look in her eyes told Arthur everything he needed to know. She wasn't just here to reclaim what she had been denied. She wasn't just after reconciliation, no, there was more. She had seen the cracks in his empire, and now she had the power to exploit them. Could she have come to seek forgiveness, to rebuild a relationship with a father who had abandoned her? Or did she want revenge for the years of silence, the years when she had been nothing more than a secret to be forgotten? The truth was, Lily had a choice. She could have reconciliation. She could forgive Arthur for his past mistakes. But that wasn't the only option on the table. With the knowledge she now had, with the control she wielded, she could just as easily demand her share of Sterling Innovations, using her newfound connection to Arthur as a bargaining chip. And in that moment, Arthur realized that she didn't need him to give her a piece of the company. She could simply take it. What would she do? Would she use her leverage for personal gain, or would she decide that the price of revenge wasn't worth the cost of family? Lily had made her presence known. She was no longer an unknown shadow from the past. She was in control, and Arthur now had to face the consequences of his abandonment. Would she offer him a second chance, or would she destroy everything he had worked for? As the room settled into an uneasy silence, the board members exchanged glances, waiting for Arthur to make the next move. His authority was slipping away, no longer a matter of business acumen or corporate strategy. Now it was about something far more personal. The legacy of Arthur Vance, the empire he had built, the future of Sterling Innovations was at stake. Arthur's desperation was clear. He couldn't lose it all, not like this. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to see his empire fall apart, because of a secret he had tried to bury. But as he looked at Lily standing before him, calm and poised with the power to dismantle everything he had built, he realized that the real question wasn't just whether he could save his company, it was whether he could save himself. Would Lily's presence forever change the course of his future? Could they find a way to rebuild what had been broken, or would the weight of their shared history, of the years lost and the choices made, be too much to overcome? As the media continued to buzz outside, and the tension inside the room reached a boiling point, one thing became painfully clear. The world that Arthur had once controlled was slipping through his fingers. The future of Sterling Innovations was no longer in his hands, and the ghosts of his past had come back to haunt him. The story ended on a powerful cliffhanger, a question lingering in the air, unanswered. What matters more, family, legacy, or the price of hidden secrets? Will the revelations of the past lead to healing, or will they forever alter the course of their futures? Arthur, for the first time, didn't have the answer, and neither did Lily. This part focuses on the immediate aftermath of the scandal and the uncertainty about the future. It sets the stage for the critical decision that Lily must make, while also emphasizing the high personal and professional stakes for Arthur. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. We appreciate your support. See you in the next chapter.